So you're very welcome to this discussion, exploring how a victim-focused approach can and should shape every stage of the justice process after a road traffic collision. The March edition of Project Edward's First Friday series comes just weeks after the launch of the government's new road safety strategy, which sets ambitious casualty reduction targets within a safe system framework and recognises the Ministry of Justice's lead role on victims of crime, including road traffic victims. So our audience of road safety professionals, policymakers and roads policing representatives has a crucial role, that's you, a crucial role in ensuring that the needs, rights and voices of victims and bereaved families are central to how we design roads, enforce the law and support people through the justice system. So we'll be asking what victim-focused justice means in practice, what's working and where the new strategy could take us further. Good. Well, let me now get my guests to introduce themselves. Angela, would you like to kick off and tell us a couple of things about you? Over to you, Angela Tylan.
Thank you. Good morning, James. Thank you for having me on this morning. I'm the founder of the Ely Memorial Fund, set up sadly after my only daughter was killed in a road traffic collision in September 2010. And the fact I set it up is I felt I wasn't looked after or supported very well once through the loss of my daughter up to the age of 23. My primary purpose of my charity is to financially support families with funeral costs, and I am also a huge advocate for road safety for young people now. I'll pass you to Diana.
Hello, Diana Wood. You're very welcome too. Just introduce yourself for us.
Yes, my name's Diana Wood. I joined the Ely Memorial Fund in 2014 after my 19-year-old son was killed in a car accident. Eli helped with Tom's funeral. I wanted to give something back, so I jumped on board as a trustee. 2 years ago, last September, I retired, and I now donate all my time, as and when, as much as I'm needed, to support Ange and to raise the profile, promote road safety, and to try and stop families from going through the pain Ange and I have been through and still going through.
Thank you. Andy, let's move to you. You're very welcome. Tell us about you and what you do and what your background is.
Morning, everyone. My name is Andy Lavanchy. I am a police inspector in West Midlands Police. I served a fairly lengthy period of time on the roads policing unit in the West Midlands. And whilst I did that, I completed some research at undergraduate and master's degree level into roads policing and various aspects of casualty-related incidents. And one of the papers that I wrote was the impact or lack of impact of restorative justice in road policing.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Andy. And Raymond Williams, introduce yourself for us, please.
Yes, buddy. Good morning, everybody. I'm Raymond and started my sort of professional career in the 90s as a local authority road safety officer. Then moved on to join North Wales Police in a variety of roles. But the majority of it before I retired in October 2022 was as an SIO, a lead investigating officer on the road policing units. Over 20 years experience as a family liaison officer. And sadly, I've met people in my career that I would have never met, and most of them are lovely people, unless they'd had encountered a tragedy in their lives on the roads. Did homicide FLO as well as roads policing, and hopefully we'll have a discussion later on at the different levels of service people get comparing a murder victim to a road traffic victim. I now, fortunate enough, after retiring, I work 3 days a week for Slater and Gordon, which is one of the main national law firms in the UK. And I've got to know Ange and Di very well indeed as one of their supporters, as well as James. So thank you for the welcome and look forward to taking an active part in the discussion.
Thank you, all of you. Let's crack on then. So I'm going to start by talking to Angela and Diana. So both of you, pleased to get involved. The question is, when you talk to the families that you meet, and you're based in Hereford, so in Herefordshire or wherever you're talking to them, what do you think victim-focused justice actually means to them in real everyday terms?
From my personal experience, James, I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be respected in what I was trying to understand through the whole process of having the frenzy of police around me and then filtering to hardly any contact weeks following through to the investigation and inquest and not being really told what the whole process was about. And I had a very good flow, but I didn't feel it was enough for me. Whereas when I speak to other families, it's all a very different story. There's not one consistent approach to how we look after the families on impact. And this is why I did my guide, because I felt very lost and not understanding the processes. I wasn't being heard, listened to. I felt as if I was a bit of a burden, which I think some of us have parts of that, but that was from my own personal experience. Whereas I know if I'd have been listened to and thought about it, the whole process, told me what was happening, how I can have an input to what was going on, I think I may have come out of the whole process a little bit better, but I didn't, sadly. Whereas I know Diana had a different experience to me. I'll let Diana share what happened to Di.
Yeah, please, Di, please tell us.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my story was a little bit different. I would say I didn't have the police at the door. I had a phone call from the hospital, and was told that our son had been involved in an accident. Well, they did the various checks as they normally do. And would we go to the hospital? So I said yes, of course we'll go to the hospital. Thinking I was going to spend the day in the hospital. But when I got there and we walked into A&E, we were met by a nurse and a police officer. Took into the parent room and to be told our son had passed away. We had a brilliant flow officer, which he was very, very good, very supportive. And I don't know where I'd be like without him and his support to take us through it. And I froze. I couldn't walk towards the car on the day of the funeral, but he taught me and said, "Yes, come on, Di, we can do this. We've got to do this." And so I was very grateful for that. So yes, like I said, that was my experience.
Thank you, Donna. Let me talk to Andy Lavanchy. Tell us about the research that you did then, and what you were hoping to achieve, and then let's perhaps see if we can marry that up with those real life experiences we've heard.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to hear those two differing stories, really, and I think really highlights the reason that I did some research into it. So, I guess from a crime perspective, the police are generally pretty good at restorative justice, and that there is a lot of work in the crime arena. And I think everyone in this meeting will probably accept that roads policing sometimes sits outside of the crime arena. And I know that it was mentioned earlier a little bit about the differences between a murder and a road death, which is something I'll cover in a little while. But they are so vastly different that I wanted to explore the reasons that restorative justice isn't used so much in roads policing, I guess, to answer your question.
Okay. Raymond Williams, what have you seen in your time as an FLO and since then as we've tried to move towards kind of more consistent approaches and learning from good practice?
Yes, I think, well, the FLO role within the police, it's a voluntary role in most forces, and I believe rightly so, because you've got to be a certain type of individual to be wanting to do the role, and certainly to do it well. You've got to have empathy and understanding of the needs of the victims that you're dealing with. I'm not too keen on some nowadays where they said if you join the roads policing unit, you've got to be an FLO. And I don't think that works well. However, in my experience as an FLO, you are meeting people at the worst at the times in their lives. Nobody gets up in that morning and expects to have lost a loved one by the evening. And as I say, you meet these people, and wonderful people, who have had the shock of their life, having what's happened to them. And I was very, very lucky in my career, having support of, senior management, in knowing the value of being an FLO, and that would give you ample time to do the job properly. And you hear horror stories, unfortunately, now working for Slater and Gordon. Obviously, we support victims, again, in a similar role, but wearing a different hat. And I think that's down to the time possibly given to some of the FLOs by their line managers. They have to carry on with their normal jobs, like obviously all the other FLOs do. They have to stop people for speeding, they have to support the Fatal 4 or the Fatal 5, and they have to go to other police-related incidents. So wearing several hats of the FLO, I think, is the problem. We've heard the word consistency used twice this morning, and that's what I think is needed for the future, is a proper, consistent, well-researched into knowing what an FLO should do and what the families expect of them. So that everybody, regardless of where you live in the United Kingdom, that you get the same level of support from whatever police force happens to be operating in your area.
Angela and Diana, let's come back to you then. You've heard the input there from Andy and from Raymond. So what have you seen in the time where you've run your charity? Has consistency improved? Are voices more heard now? Is procedural justice fair, respectful, and more transparent today than it was when you experienced it?
I think it has got better since I went through the whole system back in 2010. I still feel, though, that we aren't being listened to, especially when it comes to the consistency. I just felt that because my Flo was on other active duties, she couldn't give me the dedicated time that she needed to. And she was desperate to give me the dedicated time because my daughter, which Emma's my only daughter, I was so bereft I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't understand the whole process. Nobody really explained the process to me. I had a barrage of officers, media. It was just, it was mind blowing, and nobody can correlate the whole what was going on. And I felt that the flow should be dedicated to you. I wanted my flow with me all the step of the way, but that couldn't happen. And because there is so many different police officers pulled every single day to do other things, or they're moved around in divisions, the lack of that empathy towards families is hard. But I believe that is getting better. But we still keep hearing that families are being let down, they're not being supported properly, or the flow hasn't got the time. There's not a dedicated flow team within the police force. Whereas in Hereford, where we are, we haven't got a dedicated flow team. They're pulled off all different duties. I think that's where it fails. But I'm hoping it's different, and I do hear that it's different, but I still hear that there's not enough time for families and not to be heard.
Diana, just give us a flavour of a kind of a typical day after you'd lost your son, in terms of what access you had to your family liaison officer, what sort of questions you were asking, and how well served you were by them.
We were asking lots of questions. We were asking, like why, what happened, to be told that they were doing drug tests and alcohol tests and everything on him. But I thought, gosh, this happened early morning, and I thought, but then, you explain to this happens with everybody, and, this is the routine that it follows. But yes, I'm saying, yeah, my Flo, he was there, I think, for the day of the accident and the day after. Then he was due to go off on leave. But he said, do you want me to get you another Flo officer to come and see you? And I thought, well, no, what's the point? Because you start to get a little bit of a rapport and feel comfortable with the flow officer that you've got. So no, I didn't want another one. And like right up until he came to see us. He said he was going to come and see us the day after the funeral, which I really felt I needed that support. But higher up said to him, "No, you're not. You've got work to do in the station." He had to stay in the station, so he was unable to come out to see us. Which, after the funeral, realistically, it sticks in you that yes, it's final. He has gone, because to start with, I was in a bit of like denial. Well, no, we can't have gone. And the day after, I really felt I needed that support. But he wasn't allowed the time to come back and see us. And then after that, he only came and seen us another once after then. And he said, "I knew that you needed me." He said, "I did have an argument in the office, but he said it was out of my control. I couldn't come." So I did feel then I was very let down on that. I know it is all down to money, time and money. I understand that. But I do think when you've gone through something so traumatic as losing a child, you need all that support that you can get.
Thank you. Andy, you've written then about restorative justice in roads policing, where victims rarely have an opportunity to participate meaningfully in the process. So how's your research shaped your thinking about when restorative approaches are appropriate after road traffic offences, and what safeguards are essential to protect victims?
I think it's really important to understand what restorative justice is actually trying to achieve. So we see restorative justice quite regularly in policing run alongside a criminal case. And that's something that I don't really see in roads policing. So for give you an example, if you look at an academic research perspective, there is one article on restorative justice in policing, and that was written by me on the whole of Google Scholar. If you look at criminality and restorative justice, I haven't got the number for you, but I can tell you it's substantially greater than one. So I think, to answer your question around safeguard, I think it's important that prosecution does take place. I think it's right and proper that the criminal justice system has its say. I think what does concern me is that we often in policing see a prosecution entirely on its own, and the victims, as we've already heard, very, very seldom get an opportunity to say what they want. And in the paper that I wrote, it's really quite clear that victims and their families really need to be heard. And I don't think it's always essential that their wishes are actioned. And I back that up by saying sometimes victims just want to say, this is what I would like to happen. This is how it has made me feel. This is what I am going through. And I'm really, really sorry to hear that somebody didn't have someone with them, as you've just mentioned, a day after the collision. That really breaks my heart. But I think to safeguard people, we need to prosecute. Okay, I can't really make that much clearer. We need to put those who are responsible for serious harm through the justice system so that we can safeguard that from happening again. But I don't think that safeguarding should overtake and entirely eradicate the wishes of a victim.
Raymond, let's talk about finding outcomes that can repair harm and promote healing as much as it's possible, rather than focusing solely on punishment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'd like to start really as leading on from what Andy mentioned. As it happened, I was one of the first restorative justice trained officers in North Wales, and there was a lot of skepticism about it to begin with. But I've seen the power that can happen. That links very nicely to your question now, really. I remember one particular case of a drink driver who'd killed a young man in the early hours of the morning. And yes, he did face justice. The matter did go to court, and he was all there in his suit, very apologetic. And he did have he was sentenced to a term of imprisonment. And the family were grateful for that. But what the family really in that case wanted to know was, why did he do it? And, why was my son killed on that road that night? And I'd facilitated a meeting between the mother and the person who was imprisoned. And it was such a powerful meeting. Yes, the justice systems was important to that family, but you can't measure the impact actually meeting the offender, if you like, in person. And just to understand that it wasn't personal. And I know that sounds very simple this time on a Friday morning, but the family, it was a proper sort of tick in the head as, okay, he didn't pick on my son that night. He didn't go out randomly in his van looking for a person to knock down and kill. And that there's so much power in that, in the terms of restorative justice. But going to my second point, I think, and I don't think it's used well enough, in my opinion, by trained officers, is the victim impact statement in Crown Courts, following sentencing. I've seen some fantastic examples of that. Myself and my team, we used to go to town on them because we saw that as the last opportunity the judge and the jury and everybody in the courts had to hear what the family actually wanted to tell that offender and the courts. We've been told off once or twice by putting things into pictures that shouldn't be there, but in my opinion, it is what it says on the tin. It's a victim impact statement from the families, and I've heard some poor examples as well, where it's half page of an A4 because the FLO or the officer hasn't taken enough time to understand what the family want to tell. So I think there are tools in place now with this in the justice system that need to just be used a little bit better, and that could be the victim impact or restorative justice. But as a company, of course, we support many charities who now offer fantastic support in providing case workers who work alongside the FLOs in many forces. But again, they come back to the hit and miss of where you live, is to the terms of who you get and if at all, and how it's managed.
What I'm just going to do now is invite questions from our audience, our participants. And so if you would like to ask a question or make a comment or get involved with the conversation, just please, I think you can raise your hand. And I think there's a way that we can raise hands and we get a numbered sequence. So we should just work our way through them. So, but meanwhile, let me put to Angela, I suppose, after what we're looking here, after a fatal collision, you want to know, was the driving careless or dangerous? But also, you kind of, from your point of view, what do you need in order to understand what happened, felt that you feel heard, and you can begin to rebuild your life? Just talk to us
Yeah.
about what the important things were for you.
All I kept saying is why. Why can't they answer? I needed the right answers, and even though there was no third party to Emma's collision and fatality that evening, the whole investigation process seemed to take forever. All the toxicologies, her phone was taken, everything, because at the point of impact after Emma's death, Emma was classed as a criminal, because until the inquest was over, we don't know whether Emma contributed to her death or whether something else happened. So that angst of not knowing was the worst thing ever for me. And all I wanted was answers. I didn't want to, extend the time any more than what I was going through. And then when I got to the inquest, which was literally 9 months later, everything that I was trying to find out and understand was verbally told to me at the inquest, and I wasn't prepared for all the jargon, everything that was said in their way of talking. I just wasn't prepared for that, and I completely disengaged from the inquest because my flow at the time hadn't prepared me enough. I wanted answers. It wasn't about being heard. It was the answers I needed to understand how Emma died that night and why all these other investigations had taken so long. And then when I could see it, hear it, I wasn't prepared. And that's where I feel I was very let down. But other families do it differently, have it differently. They go through court process. But I wish I knew what I know now at that beginning, because that's what I share now with families, being prepared, asking us questions and being listened to. And that's my advocacy through my charity, because I didn't know. And I just think I share that value to other families going through their pain now after what I went through 16 years ago. And that's so important that they all understand the process. And like Raymond said, every police authority is different. And if you've got dedicated flows and teams, it's very, very different to a normal police station like Hereford. They haven't got a dedicated flow team, whereas Gloucester has. And that is where the anomalies lie, because every family, wherever the family is killed across the whole UK, is different. So that's why I try and support the families at the very beginning to say, this is what you need to ask, this is what's going to happen, but keep asking until you feel you are listened to, not being pushed aside.
Thanks, Ange. I'll just bring Andy in on that. I think that's known as secondary victimization, that kind of where the system ends up causing further harm to a family. Have you seen that improve? Has there been, maybe through the work that you did, the papers that you've produced, that things have improved and that is less likely to happen now?
I think that's quite a complex question to answer. Have things improved? Yes, I think they have. Have they improved to a point that they are at a reasonable standard? No, I don't. And there's a couple of words that really hit me there. The first was jargon. So in the police, we all know that jargon because we do it every day, and we use abbreviations and we use terms that perhaps people don't understand. And I think some of the answers to the problems that we're seeing in roads policing, we can overcomplicate. And actually, I think if we can just start from scratch and say, look, this is what you are going to experience. Let me tell you what the next 18 months looks like, or the next 2 years looks like. This is why it's going to take 2 years. This is what a courtroom is going to look like. This is what those people are going to say to you. I feel that that's quite an easy fix. Do I think we've got better? Yes, I do. I think there has been some investment in roads policing. Unfortunately, that has not been across the entire country. And I think there does need to be a standardised approach to roads policing. I think there's potentially some work that could be written through the College of Policing and some authorised professional practice into a standardised approach. But I find it really hard in 2026 to still hear victims of their families saying that they aren't heard and that they don't understand jargon. And really, we should be explaining that right at the start. And I feel like we get one opportunity when we meet with victims to build that rapport and build that relationship. And that's something I'd really like to see improved.
We'll come back to that. And Peter Barnett has been waiting patiently with his hand up. So, Peter, would you like to turn your microphone and camera on and tell us your question or your comment? Over to you, Peter Barnett.
If I can unmute.
Yep, you're there. We can hear you.
Me. Yeah, okay. It just, no one's mentioned, unless I'm wrong, prevention. And there are two aspects to this, I feel. The first is the roads policing collusion investigation authorised prevention practice says quite specifically up front that roads police lead investigators should ensure that longer term prevention prevention opportunities with regard to road safety issues are identified and shared. This, in my experience of attending lots of inquests as a public observer, very, very rarely happens. And that brings on to the second point, that the justice system does include inquests in the coroner's court that should lead, I believe, in all road deaths to prevention of future deaths report. And you've seen the PACS report, but only 3% of road deaths lead to PFDs. This is not good enough. And I feel the main reason is that the police, who are the main investigators, don't raise concerns with regards to future prevention. They're focused really on the crime aspects and not prevention. And I feel that there's something missing there.
Okay.
I just
Thank
wonder whether, in particular, that Andrew could comment on that.
Would you like to talk about prevention, enforcement as prevention of future victims? Any comment on that, Andy?
Yeah, it's really not about enforcement. I mean, you shouldn't be looking at you should be looking at prevention, not crime.
No,
Prevention.
what I was saying was enforcement can be viewed as a prevention of future victims. That's what I was meaning. But over to you, Andy. I'm not the expert. I'm purely facilitating.
No, I think that's a really fair point that's raised, and I think it's something I highlighted in one of the first sentences that I raised, that crime is heavily invested and investigated, but road policing does somewhat fall by the wayside. And I wouldn't say that it's not important, because it absolutely is important. But in terms of investment and response, I don't think it's such a huge priority, unfortunately. I suppose the question I would have is what does prevention look like? How does a police force measure prevention? So you're absolutely right that some forces, including the force that I work in, have brought in a team that especially targets road harm. So they go to KSI, killed seriously injured hotspots, to actively patrol and enforce. They hold stop signs to get things like unroadworthy vehicles in. But I do think that there is absolutely an arena in which that we should learn from what's already happened. And I think that's what's just been referred to, that the reports from a death or an inquest should be fed back into the police for enforcement, or for them to act upon what's happening.
Peter, back
Can
to
I
you.
just follow up on that? It follows to something that Angela said, that I feel that it's very important that the families are able to ask questions. And if they're not prepared to ask questions, which I suspect Angela wasn't, but now is, should independent road safety advocates, for instance, be able to be interested persons at inquests, such that they can ask questions about prevention, to raise concerns such that we do end up with prevention of future deaths report, and we don't end up with 97% of road deaths without a prevention of future deaths report, which I think is a scandal.
Angela, what do you say to that?
Thank you, Peter. I wish I did have that voice. I wasn't strong enough at the time. I was devastated. I couldn't get words out. I wasn't functioning, and I wasn't strong enough. And I wish I had, but I wish my family would have stood up. But we were all so devastated that I wish I'd had an advocate to ask those questions and make sure I was being heard, because I lost 6 months after I lost Emma. And then my brain has been affected in a way because of that trauma, the aftermath following. That's why I feel it's so important. My Hugs Pack for my charity offers that advice at the very beginning. Please ask, please inquire, make sure you're heard, because after the process, you haven't got the time to go back. It's gone, it's moved on. You need to be listened all the way through. I do think an advocate to help the families, but I think your flow should be helping you with that. But like I say, there's a postcode lottery. One flow area does brilliantly and other flows areas don't. And this is where the anomaly is, and it has to be consistent right across all the police forces. There's another person saying beds, canes and hearts. They got dedicated, they got their trauma, it's all there. But coming to where I am in Hereford, it's not there. So this is where I think it's let down. This is where the families are let down. And yeah, I've just wished somebody would held my hand along the whole process and told me exactly what was happening, and I could prepare my questions as and when I needed it and to be heard.
Thank you, Angela. Raymond, your hand's up. I was going to come to you anyway because we've got more to talk about, but please tell us
It's
what
okay.
your-
Well, very quickly, first of all, just to point out to Ange and Di, really, I've noticed Phil McCarthy's comments. Phil actually is mentioning, remember I mentioned Paul Cook, Joel Jevons.
You've gone to mute. You're muted, Raymond. Your microphone. You're back. You're back. Sorry.
Apologies. Yes, okay.
Start again.
Ange
Just
and Di,
mention Phil McCarthy. Just tell us because Phil's got a comment in the chat. So pick up on that if you would. Thank you.
Yes, that's what I was doing with my mouth. Ange and I don't suppose you realise the comment Phil's made. It's about the wonderful individuals that we discussed a couple of weeks back, Paul Cook, Saul Jevons and Steve O'Keefe. They're very, very fortunate in Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire to have the RVT, but we just mentioned that in passing. But the reason I put my hand up was to partly answer Peter's comments. As the sort of recently retired LIO from roads policing, one of the first thing that takes place as early as possible is the site meeting where the collision took place. Obviously, we all agree that one death is too much, but when they do occur, all the interested parties meet at the scene, highways, the police, the fire service, anybody with an interest in that area for preventative measures to make sure, is there anything the Highways Authority can do straight away to make sure that a similar occurrence doesn't happen again. And most police forces have an excellent relationship with their coroners. And of course, the inquest is a formal process, but leading up to the inquest, there would have been consultation with the coroner in most cases so that they can prepare and be ready to the prevention of future deaths if need be for that. But valid point, and I'm very grateful for Peter, his attendance in inquest, to make sure that people who don't feel strong enough to stand up have that voice, and it's so important, isn't it?
Thank you, Raymond. And let's stick with you because we did promise earlier to just understand some differences in your role as an FLO. Let's say the procedural, the system differences, the practical differences from a murder FLO and a specialist traffic FLO. So reflect on that for us.
Yes, I think the main thing, rightly and wrongly, because a death is a death, isn't it? Most murders and road deaths are totally unexpected. But the financial situation impairs the homicide investigations and road traffic. Because if you have, say we have a hit and run in a police force area this evening, and obviously in hit and run the driver or the vehicle is unknown, then CID would be involved initially, and you would normally have a massive team of investigators and people looking at it. Whereas if it was a road death, somebody knocked down and the car did stop, you probably have a team of maybe 4 or 5 roads policing officers if you're lucky, with a family liaison officer. But the main difference, I would say, between the murder and the RTC investigation is that those officers would be dedicated to that murder investigation. There would be a briefing every morning. The SIO would be tasking officers to go out and CCTV inquiries, statements of witnesses, and various other aspects of the investigation. Whereas the poor old roads policing investigator would be doing other bits and pieces as well as sort of investigating the death. So it's just the difference in the management and the setup of the investigations, really. And I've never been able to work out why. Why is a murder more important than a road victim death to investigate? But the resources that are given to them are totally disproportionate. But I'd like to think with the road safety strategy that was well needed, there is mention, of course, in that to a more victim focused. So whether that will be given more prevalence as the time goes on, I'm not sure. But you were asking my opinion on that is totally the difference in the investigation process and the dedicated time given to officers investigating a murder compared to a road death.
Thank you, Raymond. Andy, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd challenge that Raymond said, it's not at all a challenge of Raymond, is that homicide is quite a simple definition. It's the killing of one person to another. And it's an absolutely relevant point that certainly in West Midlands we have a homicide department that I'm not going to quote numbers at you, but they would throw a substantial team at a homicide or a murder. But absolutely right that it's a significantly lower response when it comes to a road-related death. There has to be something around funding there, and Raymond's absolutely right that he highlights why does that happen? Why is there so few people involved in a road death? And that's a question that really needs answering. It needs some investment, and not necessarily financial investment. From recruitment and to increase roads policing presence, because your average lay person, when they think of roads policing, thinks of a traffic car driving up and down the motorway, but actually roads policing is far higher than that. Peter's spoken about prevention, and prevention is absolutely the key to resolving some of this. I just return that question, and it is a rhetorical question. What does prevention look like? How do we prevent these things? And actually investment through staffing and money is going to be a big part of that.
Thank you. Angela, let me come to you and just get your take on what do you think success should look like for a roads policing FLO? What are the criteria from the family's point of view?
My success from my whole process with Emma passing away, I would have from the beginning been advised to have a further representative with me to understand the whole process, to understand what was going on, like Andrew said from the beginning, being sat down to be told what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. We never know what length of time is going to happen through the whole investigation. I learned a lot of lessons through that, even though I didn't think I was learning, but I did. And the passion from myself after 18 months, I just couldn't allow other families to go through the pain and suffering of not knowing and not having my voice heard. So doing my Hugs Pack brought that around through my niece. And I think if we are going to move forward with the processes, there should be one system approach for how we deal with road death. And if the road safety strategy is going to do anything, then we have to have dedicated teams to be able to do that across the whole UK and invest in the prevention by education, that what we do on with our Ely, because young people, everybody needs to understand the dangers of road death, but we're all so blasé about it. We can't remember sometimes how we got from A to B, and that simple concentration can cause a fatality. And if I can help families be fully aware of the whole processes, make them understand and have the support from the government through the whole process, especially having the voice of restorative justice, then I think we can see huge changes. But we need the investment and the time for the government to listen to everybody. And I'm hoping the strategy, it's only a strategy, it's got to go through the consultation and the policies. And I really hope that enables better outcomes for families and not being left alone and not having the right outcomes. And I think the sentencing needs to be really looked at, because if you are murdered, the sentence is different to a road death. And I believe that shouldn't happen.
Thank you, Angela. Raymond, the role of an FLO, it must take its toll, but how important are boundaries that you kind of put in place so that the family will have the right expectations? And does that help in the long-term relationship that you would expect to build and maintain with that family throughout the process?
Indeed, what you realise pretty quickly when you get your first couple of deployments as an FLO is how varying degrees of support families need. You get some families, they'll tell you very early on, listen, thank you for what you're doing to us, but just contact us now and again with anything important. Whereas you'll find other families who need your support, rightly so. So they do vary, and the training the FLOs get, they do tell you not to get too personal and what the boundaries are. But I don't think you'd be a decent FLO if you didn't partly grieve with the families that you're dealing with. Yes, you've got to be professional. You've got your police hat to maintain your professionalism, but you are dealing with people's grief, and you do share it. I'm probably the wrong example as an FLO if there are FLO talking, but I've arranged funerals. I've actually played the organ in somebody's funeral, one of the families I was supporting, and the FLO training tells you never to go to funerals. But sometimes you feel that you go the extra mile for the family. If you feel the family need it, you should be there for them, regardless of the boundaries. Clearly, there are professional lines that you wouldn't cross, but to be an FLO, it is, as I said to begin with, it's a voluntary role, and you've got to be a certain type of person to want to do it. I noticed my colleague Steve has put a comment in the boxes underneath there. Some police officers now, some police forces now, don't actually deploy an FLO if it's going to be a coronial case, which I think it's wrong. The terms of if there's no third party involvement, it's just the reporting officer or the coroner's officer that would be even dealing with the families. So there's many reasons for that. There's a shortage. There's a national shortage of FLOs. Not quite sure if it's a role that people don't want to do anymore. So I don't know whether that sums up your question, James. It's a difficult role to do. I've seen a lot of excellent police officers retire on ill health because of some of the deployments they've had as FLOs, but that's another different field to manage. That's in this morning's forum. I'm so pleased that Angela and I are representing, families that have gone through the worst times of their life and showing others, the support that they had and the way forward.
You got through it. Tell us why you became an FLO, why you volunteered, and what mechanisms you had in place to be able to cope with what you dealt with.
Yes, again, it's the professional hat, isn't it? When you're there in somebody's lounge and they're in their personal homes, you've never met them, and you get to know them very quickly in terrible circumstances, and sometimes it is a hard job. It's some deployments are harder than others, and I'm not ashamed to admit that sometimes I will leave their family homes back in my police car, and I will pull up in the next lay-by, and I'll have a little cry. And I don't think there's anything at all wrong with that, because you've got to have your emotions out. And then within the next couple of minutes, normally the radio goes off in your headphones, isn't it? Can you go to a domestic, or can you go to something else on the road further down the road, and then you're back into the reality. But you are human beings, FLOs are, and you've got to have that level of empathy as a person. It's not the job for everybody. I would imagine some of the 6'2" burly officers that would be very adaptable of fighting in a pub on a Saturday night, perhaps they wouldn't make the best FLOs, and some would. You can't thing. But personally, myself, I get a lot of satisfaction. And when people ask me what I miss most from the police, my honest answer is being an FLO. It's the most satisfying role I ever did in the police. And you feel that you're there for people at the worst at the time in their lives. And that little bit of difference that you can possibly make, you get a lot out of that yourself.
We're going to start wrapping up now. Andy, I'll come to you. Let's have a think. If you had the chance to add one concrete victim-focused commitment into the implementation plan for this new road safety strategy, what would you be including, and why?
I think it has to be a national approach. I think that has got to be the answer. There is so much that I would like to say to that, but if you're asking me for one thing, I would like to see
one.
Okay, so standardised practice would be my main one. I think that every force needs to behave the same. Every force needs to provide full-time FLOs, in my view. I listen to Angela, who's just up the road from me. We have a full-time FLO team here, but just down the road in Hereford, and there is no FLO team. And I just don't feel that can be allowed to happen. The second thing I would like to see some investment in training for firstly response police officers who are first on scene, but definitely for FLOs. Something else I've written about quite extensively is mental health in policing, and I don't think we can take away the impact of trauma on a police officer's brain, certainly in this field. So I would like to see some investment in that. I think the final point for me really would be back to the start, that restorative justice does have a place in roads policing, and it absolutely should be brought in. We should be giving victims the opportunity to engage in the process, whether that is meeting with the offender after they come out of prison. I mean, one of the things, if I very quickly tell you a story, which something happened to me where I got shot at with an air pistol, and the chap, when he came out of prison, offered to come and speak to me, and I said no. And I've regretted that for the rest of my career. I wish it's something that I'd taken him up on, because it would have given him an option to tell me why it happened and for me to tell him how I feel. And I think punitively, once the punishment's issued, that's the end. But it's not the end for the victims. They still are very much living this. And I think that there is an opportunity for restorative justice to continue even after the sentence concludes.
Thank you very much. Diana Wood, what do you think are the key outcomes and measures that matter to victims?
Well, having that support and knowing that you've always got a flow available, because like my story was a little bit different to Angie's. There was no third party involved with Tom's accident. But however, Tom was speeding. We knew Tom was speeding, and we'd had many conversations with him. But I also had the added advantage with Ange. I had Ange that helped me and told me what to expect with the inquest and the ongoing. So that really made all the difference that I'd got that support.
Thank you. Ange, I'll come to you. We asked Andy about what he'd want to see in the road safety strategy. So from your point of view, as a voice for victims, what do you want? What are a couple of things that you think must happen as part of making things better for the victim and the family?
The whole national approach to road traffic policing, as Andy has said, we have to have one system approach to deal with road fatalities and serious injuries. We can't have all these divisions working differently and independently. And I'm hoping that the road safety strategy will do that. It will give the police forces around the UK the right direction, the right funding, and what we need to support families going forward. The independent advisor with flows is crucial. A bereavement counsellor, I think, is absolutely amazing. I couldn't find a right bereavement counsellor. I didn't know where to find one, and they are key to your recovery, same as what police officers go through. I used to ask officers, how do you cope after a trauma like you've seen? They have debriefings. We'll have to have a debriefing with families as well. Let's share our heartache together, understanding what's going on. And as like Raymond said, the personal side of the flow is so important. We can see the empathy. I know training is very strict, but understanding what we're going through, and if we can understand what you're going through the frustrations and what you can't deal with, then we're sharing everything. We could have a louder voice, and hopefully more changes will come through. The other side of the road safety isn't doing enough for young people. It's a start, but it's not enough. And I could go on about road safety strategy, but that's another conversation, James. But
There's
it's
so
a
many
national
things.
approach.
There's so many things we'd love to get into this, and what I will just mention is there's a whole strand in the chat about road safety audits. Something else about sort of the regional and what the Road Safety Foundation are doing to offer fatal collision review boards initiated by the Vision Zero Partnership in Cambridgeshire. Look, we've got plenty of material that we will pick up on, and you've got my guarantee that we will do that. But for today, Raymond, you've heard what everybody's been saying. Last word to you then, in terms of what you would add into the road safety strategy. that would improve the situation in terms of victim-focused justice?
Well, in simplicity, a coordinated, consistent approach, across the United Kingdom. Again, I now work for Slater and Gordon, the lawyers who are representing families who have gone through hard times, and we are still seeing things that shouldn't be happening, in 2026. But on the flip side, you've got all these people who have joined us this morning. There are still so many people passionate in the field of road safety and in the fields of supporting families, and long may that continue. And by us all chipping around the little bits that we can to make improvements in the world, we should just carry on, and hopefully we'll get there in the end.
I've got written down here of trauma-informed, coordinated, restorative and procedurally fair response to road harm, where victims' voices, needs and safety shape decisions at every stage. Could we live with that? Is that a kind of summary that we can work with?
Wow, yes.
Absolutely,
And
James.
I'll change that, and I'll translate into Welsh for Llywelyn David Harris for you, James.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Look, that's it for this edition, this first Friday conversation. I'm really grateful to Andy Lavanchy, Angela Tyler and Diana Wood and Raymond Williams for your contributions. Thank you to everybody for staying with us and for the contributions you've made, whether you've spoken them or you've put them into the chat, which I'm now going to have a good look at. We will have the recording posted at some point very shortly on the Project Edward website. Thank you for joining us. The next first Friday will actually be the third Friday, because the first Friday of April is Good Friday and bank holiday. So on the 17th of April, which is a third Friday, we will be talking to Alan Hiscox from the British Horse Society, and all about 10 years of the Dead Slow campaign. So do join us for that. More details a bit nearer the time. But for now, from me, James, and from everyone here, thank you very much for joining us, and have a good Friday. Bye-bye.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.